It is said there are places on earth that do not speak in voices. They speak in absence, in space, in the soft removal of what once covered the ground. Beneath the silence, the Nazca Desert opens like a sleeping page, flat, pale, and waiting, while above it, the night gathers its slow procession of stars. The air is cold in the way sacred halls are cold, the way stone remembers darkness. Here, wind does not rush. It drifts. It moves as if it has learned respect. And then the first question arrives, not spoken, only felt, like a gentle pressure behind the ribs. Why would anyone draw upon the earth? As if the earth itself were a scroll meant for the sky, marked by the moon. The desert reveals its first secret in a thin, quiet line. At first, it seems like nothing at all, only a clearing in the rough texture of stones. But as your gaze follows it, the line continues, unwavering, impossibly straight. It threads the land like a vow made without witnesses. It does not bend politely around the small rise of ground. It does not hesitate for scattered rock. It simply goes on, patient, silent, assured, until it disappears into the far distance where the darkness softens everything into mystery. Where memory fades, there are few places as faithful as a desert. In wetter lands, time is a devourer. It rots wood, swallows footprints, erases the delicate evidence of hands. But here, dryness becomes a kind of preservation, a veil, a chamber that keeps secrets unrotted. The Nazca Plain holds what was placed upon it, and it holds it for a long, long time. Long before any modern eye rose into the air to see this place from above, the Nazca people lived in the margins of rainfall. They were quiet artisans of clay and water, crafting vessels, weaving cloth, shaping pigments from earth, learning the language of scarce rivers and reluctant seasons. In a world where rain was rare and every drop felt sacred, survival itself became ceremony. And so, perhaps it was inevitable that they would learn to speak to the heavens, not with towers, not with thunder, but with lines. Whispers tell us the Nazca did not carve these marks with violence. They did not cut deep into the earth like conquerors. Instead, they performed a gentler magic. They moved the darker stones aside, patiently, revealing the lighter soil beneath. A drawing made by subtraction, a message written in what is not there. Even this feels like a ritual. To remove, to clear, to reveal, to trust that what is uncovered will remain. In the moonlight, the line becomes more than a mark. It becomes a path the mind wants to follow. You imagine footsteps that once traced it, slow and purposeful, like a procession. You imagine the hush of bodies moving at dusk, the soft scrape of sandals, the murmured breath of prayers offered to an immense and indifferent sky. Perhaps the line was meant to be walked, not only seen. Perhaps the act of walking turned longing into an offering. And yet, the mystery arrives gently, like mist creeping over stone. From the ground, these lines are difficult to understand. They stretch beyond the immediate view, too large to hold inside a single glance. The greatest shapes, those that later generations would call hummingbird, spider, monkey, do not reveal themselves fully to a person standing beside them. Their meaning hides in scale. So why were they made with such care, as if watched by something higher than any hill? Some believe the lines were tied to water, ritual pathways meant to summon rain, to honor unseen currents beneath the desert crust, to speak in symbols to the forces that governed life and death. Others have searched for alignments with the heavens, pathways pointing toward solstices, stars, and the slow turning of the year. And still others suggest social gatherings, pilgrimages, festivals of movement across an open-air temple floor. Each theory is a lantern. Each illuminates a portion of the dust. None fully dissolves the darkness. And perhaps that is the point. There's a kind of devotion in making something you cannot fully see. Imagine it. A people bending low to the earth, clearing stones in deliberate lines, measuring with cords and stakes, stepping back only enough to keep the shape true, yet never rising high enough to witness the final image as we know it now. To create a vast design without the certainty of seeing it completed is to place faith in something beyond the self, in ancestors, in gods, in the desert's memory, in time. It is said the Nazca lived with the sky as their ceiling and the earth as their altar. In such a world, perhaps the sky did not need words. Perhaps it needed only proof of attention, of patience, of reverence made visible. Perhaps these were not messages, in the way we imagine messages, but offerings, enormous, silent gestures placed upon the ground like wreaths for the unseen. And perhaps, too, they were meant for eyes not yet born. There is an eerie tenderness in that thought, that someone might draw for a future they will never meet, that someone might write a letter into the land and trust that, one day, the world will learn how to read it. So we return again to the line, thin, pale, unwavering, vanishing into darkness. It does not shout. It does not demand. It simply invites to follow without hurrying, to let wonder become a kind of prayer. And as the night deepens, the desert keeps its counsel. The stars remain, distant and indifferent, yet somehow listening. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, not quickly, not completely, but only felt like a hush in the chest. As sleep approaches, and the world becomes soft enough to hold a mystery without breaking it. Marked by the moon, the desert returns, not as a place, but as a presence. It is said there are lines in the Nazca plain that do not simply lie upon the earth. They seem to hold it, as if the ground were a great woven cloth, and these pale corridors were threads pulled tight across time. Beneath the silence, you find one again, a line so straight it feels almost unnatural, a quiet defiance of wind and slope, of small ridges and scattered stone. It begins near your feet as a pale clearing, as if the desert has been gently parted, and then it stretches outward, unbroken, unbending, fading only when distance turns it into mist. In the darkness, it resembles a vow made visible. To stand beside such a line is to feel distance in your bones, not the distance between places, but the distance between moments, between centuries. The horizon becomes a slow unfolding, and your thoughts begin to soften at the edges. You realize how easy it is for time to erase most things, and how strange it is that this has remained, not carved with violence, not painted with loud color, but drawn in absence. The Nazca did not write with ink. They wrote by removing. Dark stones, sun-baked and mineral-rich, were pushed aside, gathered like quiet borders, and beneath them, a paler skin of earth was revealed, as if the desert had always been holding a hidden page. The act itself feels ceremonial. A hand does not need to be shown for you to sense it. The steady rhythm of labor, the patient attention, the refusal to rush. A line is not made in a single breath. It is made through many, through days that begin with dawn's thin light and end with starlight, cooling the dust. Whispers tell us the Nazca people lived where rain was rare, where every drop carried meaning, where water was not only necessity, but mystery, sometimes present, sometimes withheld, like an unseen judge. And so, the land shaped them into listeners. They became artisans of survival, shaping clay into vessels, weaving fibers into cloth, learning the quiet logic of seasons. In such a place, patience is not a virtue. It is a way of breathing. And perhaps that is why these lines exist at all. Because patience in the Nazca world was sacred. It is said they used simple tools, ropes, stakes, and the careful eye that comes from repeated devotion. A cord pulled taut between 2 points becomes a promise. A stake pressed into the ground becomes an anchor for intention. Step by step, the line is walked into being, measured, corrected, rewalked, until it stops being an action and becomes a permanent thought. The desert becomes a loom, and the lines become threads, not threads of fabric, but threads of meaning. Corridors drawn across the plateau, as if the earth were being prepared for a procession that must never end. Some believe straightness itself can be holy. A straight path can be a corridor for offerings, a route for ceremonial walking, a silent instruction to the stars. Look here. Remember this. Witness us. And yet, where memory fades, the contradiction rises like fog. From the ground, these lines do not reveal their full story. They are too long, too vast. They refuse to be held in a single glance. To stand within them is to see only fragments, like reading a sacred text with half the pages missing. So why do they feel addressed? Why does the desert seem to be speaking upward? Some voices insist the lines were meant to be walked, not merely seen. That the Nazca moved along these corridors in ritual rhythm, footsteps repeating, until the earth itself learned the pattern. Perhaps the walking was the message. Perhaps the repeated motion stirred the sleeping spirits beneath the soil, the ones that guard water in hidden chambers. Perhaps processions traced these lines the way prayers trace the heart, not to conquer mystery, but to live beside it. But there's another layer, a quieter, more unsettling one. The grandest shapes, those that will come later, those that resemble creatures and symbols, are clearest from above, from a height the Nazca could not easily reach. This is the soft, haunting paradox at the center of it all. To create something that requires distance to understand, it suggests a faith that stretches beyond the ordinary. Faith in the sky as witness. Faith in gods who hover unseen. Faith in ancestors who watch from the starlit veil. Or perhaps faith in the future, in eyes not yet born. Imagine the humility of that. To labor for an image you may never fully see. To place meaning into the land and trust that time will deliver it. To leave a message not for your own era, but for another dawn, another mind. The line at your feet does not answer. It does not explain itself. It simply continues, pale and unwavering, as if it were pulled straight through centuries by an invisible hand. And the longer you look, the more the line becomes less of a thing and more of a feeling. A quiet insistence that the world contains intentions older than our questions. Beneath the silence, the desert holds its breath. The stars remain cold, distant, yet strangely attentive. And you, standing at the edge of this ancient corridor, begin to understand something gentle. Not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are meant to be walked alongside, slowly, reverently, until the mind grows quiet enough to carry them. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, only followed. And as the line fades into the night, you feel the invitation not to chase meaning, but to rest within it, an unbroken thought across time, softly holding you, as sleep draws near. Beneath the silence, the desert changes its language. It is said that if you walk long enough among the straight corridors of Nazca, those unwavering threads pulled across the plain, you begin to expect only geometry. You begin to accept the earth as a place of rules, lines, angles, distance. And then, marked by the moon, something softer appears. Not a straight path this time. A curve. A gentle arc that suggests a wing. A slow, widening bend that feels almost like breath. At first, it is only a fragment. An unfinished thought in pale earth. Dark stones parted as if the desert has been carefully combed. The night air is cool. The sky is deep with stars. And the ground, so quiet, seems to hold its own heartbeat. Where memory fades, the Nazca plain begins to feel less like a map, and more like a dream. The curve continues. Another follows. And gradually, so gradually it feels like something being revealed rather than made, a form begins to gather itself out of absence. A hummingbird, delicate and yet immense. Its lines are pale and clean against the darker stones, as if the earth has been lifted and turned into parchment. The bird's wings spread wider than any living hummingbird could ever dream. Its beak extends long and slender, pointing into the desert night like a quiet question asked of the sky. You do not see it all at once from here. From the ground, it is too large, too scattered. You see a wing, then a curve, then a long corridor of line that does not make sense until your mind steps backward into imagination. And in that stepping back, something shifts inside you, because now the Nazca lines are no longer only writing. They are presence. Whispers tell us the Nazca people lived in a world shaped by thirst and patience. They gathered water where they could, held it like treasure, and listened to seasons that did not always keep their promises. Their hands shaped clay into vessels, dyed threads into patterns, carved meaning into the small objects of daily life. And then, somewhere between need and reverence, they shaped meaning into the land itself. Why these beings? A hummingbird, a monkey, a spider. Life rendered with ceremonial patience, each form vast enough to be walked inside, like entering a sacred chamber. These are not sketches made to decorate a wall. They are invitations, symbols placed upon the earth, as if to open hidden doors in the mind. The hummingbird is not only a creature here, it becomes a sign. In many old ways of seeing, small bright creatures carry large meanings. The hummingbird is a messenger of bloom, of return, of the brief miracle of color in an otherwise harsh world. It hovers, neither fully landing nor fully leaving, like a thought suspended between waking and sleep. And in the Nazca Desert, where water and flowering are both precious, the hummingbird feels like a prayer made visible. But the prayer does not speak plainly. It leaves room for silence. Some have wondered if these figures were tied to the cycles of the year, to seasons and harvests, to the delicate timing of planting and survival. Some feel the animals are linked to water, to fertility, to the unseen currents that move beneath dry ground. And some believe they were meant to be walked in ritual processions, footsteps tracing the lines, repeating, until the earth remembered the request. Yet another thought arrives, quiet and unsettling. From the ground, the figures are difficult to grasp. From above, they become clear. And so the old contradiction returns, draped in a veil of starlight. Why create something meant to be seen from a height you could not easily reach? Here, the desert grows stranger, almost sacred in its secrecy. To make a figure so large that it requires distance to understand is an act of faith. It suggests a witness beyond the ordinary. The sky itself, the sun and moon, birds riding invisible currents, or gods whose eyes do not need to stand on ground. Beneath the silence, the hummingbird seems to wait, as if it expects to be recognized. And this is where the thought of guardianship begins to stir. Perhaps these are not merely animals. Perhaps they are seals. Signs placed upon the earth to be read by something that does not walk the ground, something that passes overhead, watching in stillness. The figures may be offerings, yes, but also thresholds. They mark the desert like sacred sentinels, standing between worlds, the world of human breath and the world beyond breath. The Nazca made them not with loud tools, but with patience. They moved stones aside, line by line, until a feather emerged. They cleared a curve, and it became a wing. They followed the spiral, and it became a call. In this way, the desert becomes a place where creation is subtraction, where meaning is revealed by what is removed. And the more you linger with the hummingbird, the more it feels like a thought too ancient to hurry. It does not demand that you understand. It does not offer a single interpretation, like a locked door with one key. Instead, it offers you something softer, a space to wonder, a place to listen. Marked by the moon, the lines lie silent. The bird does not fly. It remains suspended in dust and starlight, delicate yet immense, as if time itself has been asked to pause. And as the night deepens, you begin to sense the Nazca Plateau as a kind of open-air scripture, written for those who can read with more than their eyes. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. Perhaps it was never meant to be found in full from the ground. Perhaps it was meant to be felt, fragment by fragment, until the mind becomes quiet enough to accept the unfinished. The figures do not explain themselves. They simply watch the centuries pass, waiting for the right eyes, waiting for the right silence, waiting, like the hummingbird, for the moment when the world becomes gentle enough to understand a message that was never spoken aloud. It is said some questions are not meant to be answered quickly. They are meant to be carried, like a charm in the pocket of the mind. So let this one arrive gently beneath the silence. What does a spider know about water? Marked by the moon, the Nazca Desert lies open, flat as an altar, pale as bone beneath starlight. The air is cool and thin, and the wind moves with the patience of an old priest, not wishing to disturb what has been kept. Here, Thirst shapes every story, not the dramatic thirst of a single day, but the long thirst, the kind that teaches a people to notice every cloud, every shift in season, every rumor of moisture carried on far-off air. In such a land, water is not only a resource, it is a mystery, a blessing, a negotiation with the unseen. And it is here, in this shrine of absence, that the spider appears. At first, you do not recognize it. You see only pale lines, thin corridors cleared of dark stones, stretching across the plain with delicate intent. Then the pattern gathers itself, quietly, as if it has always been waiting for you to slow down enough to see. A leg, another, a small body at the center. The spider is there, etched at impossible scale, fragile yet enduring, like a soft oracle pressed into the dust. The spider is not an obvious symbol of rain. It is not a river, not a cloud, not a wave. It is something quieter. It lives in corners. It waits in stillness. It weaves without announcing itself. And perhaps that is why it belongs here. Because in the Nazca world, water often arrived the same way. Not with thunder, but with subtle signs, with slow changes, with hidden routes beneath stone. Whispers tell us the Nazca learned to survive by listening. They built where they could, planted where the land allowed, and tended moisture like a sacred inheritance. They shaped clay vessels to hold what was precious. They understood wells and springs, and they engineered ways of guiding water through harsh earth, careful channels and entrances that spiral downward into shadow, where coolness gathers and time moves slowly. Even without naming every structure, you can feel the truth. This was a civilization in conversation with dryness. And so the lines, these immense drawings, begin to feel less like decoration and more like language. A language of longing, not drawn to conquer the land, not drawn to declare dominance, but drawn as if to plead with it. Imagine the quiet labor, stones pushed aside, pale earth revealed, line by line, not a violent carving, but a gentle clearing, like brushing dust from an old tablet. The spider's legs stretch outward with symmetry so fine it feels deliberate in a sacred way. It looks like something that was measured with rope and stake and steady breath, but guided also by intuition, by an inner sense of balance and meaning. And you begin to wonder, was this spider meant to call the rain? In some places, spiders are tied to water and weather, creatures that sense moisture before it arrives, that weave in patterns people have read like omens. In the Nazca Desert, where a single rainfall could transform the world into brief bloom, it would not be strange to see the spider as a messenger, a sign of the season turning, a small guardian of the threshold between dry and wet. Some believe the geoglyphs were walked, processions moving along paths like prayers laid flat upon the earth. You can almost hear it, if you listen in the right way. Soft footsteps at dusk, offerings carried quietly, breath rising and vanishing. A ritual not performed for spectacle, but for the unseen listeners, sky, soil, ancestors, whatever power holds water in its hand. Yet the contradiction returns, gentle as fog. From the ground, these figures can be difficult to understand. From above, they become clear. Why create a spider so vast it requires distance to recognize? This is where the chapter deepens into a hush of possibilities. Is the spider a rain caller? Its legs spreading like a net to catch what falls? Is it a sky map, its lines aligning with stars and seasonal cycles, a quiet calendar written in dust? Or is it something more intimate, something tied not to the heavens, but to the underworld? Because beneath the desert, there is another realm, where memory fades on surface. It may continue below. Hidden rivers, underground veins, cool chambers where water moves in darkness like a slow secret. And here, a forbidden thought arrives, softly, like a whisper through stone. Perhaps the Nazca listened to the ground. Perhaps they placed their ears to earth and heard what we do not hear. The faint, patient movement of moisture beneath rock, the subterranean breath of a living landscape. Perhaps they traced what they sensed. Perhaps they drew what they heard. A spider, after all, is a creature of vibrations. It reads the world through tremors, through the subtle music of a web. Maybe the Nazca, too, became readers of vibration, interpreters of hidden flow. and the spider was their emblem of that secret skill. Beneath the silence, the geoglyph feels like both prayer and diagram, both offering and seal. It is a symbol that refuses to become only one thing. It remains suspended between sky and soil, between meaning and mystery. And perhaps that is why it endures, because it was never meant to be solved like a puzzle. It was meant to be held like a sacred uncertainty. Now, the night wind passes gently over the desert, across the pale lines, across the spider's long legs. Starlight touches its silent body, not as illumination, but as acknowledgement, an ancient request still waiting in the dry air. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, not fully, not finally. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as your thoughts grow softer, spider remains, patient, delicate, immense, keeping its counsel, weaving its quiet question into the dark, until sleep, like hidden rain, begins to gather in the mind. Beneath the silence, we return to the bird, but closer now, as if the desert has decided to show us something more intimate. It is said that certain symbols do not reveal their power through size alone. They reveal it through tenderness. And here, marked by the moon, the hummingbird's long beak stretches across the Nazca plain like a compass needle, pointing, not toward a place on any map, but toward an unseen source. The pale line is clean and steady, bordered by dark stones that have been pushed aside with patient care. Dust rests in the shallow grooves. Starlight lays a thin veil over everything. The mood is gentle and almost sorrowful, because a hummingbird is a creature of brief miracles. In the living world, it arrives like a spark, a flicker of color, a heartbeat you can almost hear. It hovers for a moment between stillness and motion, then vanishes, leaving behind only the memory of shimmer. And yet here, on the desert floor, the Nazca have made it immense. They have taken something small enough to disappear in a blink and stretched it across the earth, as if they wished to slow time and hold beauty still. Where memory fades, the Nazca plain becomes a kind of altar to what cannot be kept. The hummingbird's wing arcs outward, a gentle sweep in pale earth. Its body is suggested in lines that feel both simple and impossibly precise. From the ground, you cannot hold the entire creature in one gaze. You see fragments, beak, wing, curve, like pages of story scattered across sand. And perhaps that is part of the ritual. To be near it is to accept incompleteness, to understand that some meanings arrive only in pieces, like dreams. Whispers tell us hummingbirds have long been seen as messengers, creatures that slip between worlds, between flower and air, between thirst and sweetness, between the visible and the unseen. In lands where water is precious and color is sacred, a hummingbird becomes more than an animal. It becomes a promise. The promise that bloom returns, that nectar waits somewhere, that life, no matter how harsh the season, can still find a way to hover. For the Nazca, living on the edge of dryness, such a promise would not have been small. Their world was shaped by scarcity. They learned to guide water, to store it, to protect it. They shaped pottery with careful hands and painted their own visions of animals and spirits. They watched the sky the way one watches a face for a change in expression, searching for clouds, for signs, for the faint suggestion of rain. And in that watchfulness, the hummingbird feels like an offering laid out for the heavens. Not a demand, not a declaration, an offering, a quiet way of saying, we see what is fragile, we honor what is brief, we remember what vanishes. But the deeper you linger, the more the chapter's ache begins to rise, not as sadness, but as a soft, sacred longing, because the hummingbird does not land. In life, it hovers. In the desert, it hovers still. Its beak points outward as if toward something always just beyond reach. Water, perhaps, or the season of bloom, or a divine presence that remains hidden behind a veil of sky. And the question returns, gentle as breath. Why draw for the sky if the sky does not answer? Some believe the hummingbird figure was part of a larger ceremonial route, paths meant to be walked. Processions might have moved along long straight corridors, carrying offerings, tracing the lines with footsteps like prayers laid flat. No people are needed to imagine it. The land itself suggests ritual. The careful borders of stone, the deliberate clearing, the devotion required to make the shape endure. Others wonder if the hummingbird faced a particular sunrise, aligned with the turning of the year, the moment when light returns in a certain way. Perhaps the beak points toward a season's threshold. Perhaps the wings open toward the direction from which rain-bearing clouds might sometimes come. And some feel the geoglyphs were not for human eyes at all, but for witnesses above, sun and moon, birds riding high currents, or gods whose gaze passes over the plateau like slow fire. The contradiction remains, like a veil that refuses to lift. The Nazca made images too vast to fully see from where they stood, which means they made them with faith. Faith that meaning exists even when it cannot be immediately possessed. Faith that a message can be offered without certainty of reply. Faith that the act of drawing, patient, reverent, repetitive, can be its own answer. Beneath the silence, the hummingbird becomes less a picture and more a gesture, an open hand held toward the unseen. And perhaps that is the true miracle here. Not that the lines remain, but that the devotion did not require proof. The desert wind moves softly across the pale earth. Dust rises in thin curls, then settles again, like breath. The stars continue their slow turning overhead, indifferent and beautiful, and the hummingbird remains, eternally mid-flight, stitched into silence, a small creature made vast, so it could endure. It does not explain itself. It does not resolve. It only invites you to drift with it, weightless, unhurried, into the place where questions soften, where wonder becomes a lullaby, and where sleep approaches like a gentle sky, finally lowering itself to listen. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, only felt. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. It is said the desert does not forget. It simply grows quiet enough to hold what once moved upon it. Beneath the silence, imagine an Nazca line not as an image to be admired from afar, but as a path, real, present, walkable beneath sandaled feet. The first sight is not a figure, not a hummingbird, not a spider. It is a corridor, a pale strip of earth revealed where darker stones have been gently pushed aside, bordered with careful piles that resemble the low edges of a sacred road. At dusk, the light slants low, turning every pebble into a shadow, every ridge into a soft darkening. The horizon is wide and patient. The sky begins to deepen from gold into indigo. And then, an opening image comes as if from memory rather than sight. A procession. Figures moving slowly, carrying offerings, their shadows long and thin, drawn across the ground like additional lines. Their chants swallowed by wind. You do not need to see their faces. In this story, the desert is the witness. The ritual is the presence. The lines become corridors of devotion, less a picture than a repeated act, a choreography drawn into stone, a prayer written not with ink, but with footsteps. Whispers tell us the Nazca lived in a world where water was never casual. It was precious, sometimes hidden, sometimes withheld. Seasons arrived with uncertainty. And so, communities learned to honor the sky and the soil, not only through survival, but through reverence. In such a place, ritual is not decoration. Ritual is structure. Ritual is memory. Ritual is the way people speak to what they cannot control. The Nazca Plain, then, becomes a temple without walls. No columns rise here. No roof encloses it. Yet the floor is inscribed, routes etched into the earth, guiding the body into meaning. A straight line is no longer merely straightness. It becomes a corridor for offerings, a path where breath can be organized into devotion. A curve becomes a turning of the spirit. A spiral becomes return, and the most haunting thought begins to settle in. Perhaps the lines were meant to be used, not merely observed. Imagine a community moving at twilight, when the heat releases its grip and the air cools into softness. Imagine carrying small vessels, clay and woven fiber, filled with what is precious: water, seeds, pigments, incense-like herbs. Imagine stepping onto the pale corridor and feeling the change beneath your feet, the smoother, lighter earth exposed by careful hands. The act of walking becomes a kind of reading, Each step traces a sentence without words. Each return strengthens the meaning. In time, the land remembers. And yet, where memory fades, the mystery grows deeper. If these were meant to be walked, why create shapes best seen from above? This question does not arrive like a challenge. It arrives like a veil. Because from the ground, the lines are fragments. You can walk along a corridor for a long time and still not know the larger figure it belongs to. The meaning remains incomplete, withheld by scale. The desert gives you only what you can hold in your immediate sight. But from the sky, the lines become something else entirely. Creatures, symbols, vast gestures. A hummingbird hovering across the plateau. A spider laid flat like an oracle. A monkey's spiral tail coiling into breath. So who was the intended witness? Perhaps the sky itself was watching. The sun that returns each day, indifferent and holy. The moon that marks the nights with pale calm. The birds that glide high above, seeing what humans cannot see from below. The clouds, drifting like slow messengers. Or perhaps, more quietly, the witnesses were not living at all. Ancestors, spirits, the unseen presences that old cultures often placed above and beneath the world, listening for the right offerings, the right humility, and maybe the act of walking made the message rise, like breath into cold night air. If you have ever exhaled into darkness, you know how the breath becomes visible for a moment, then disappears. Yet the act is real. The offering is made, even if it cannot be held. Walking a Nazca line could be like that. The body becomes the instrument. The path becomes the prayer. And as the chapter deepens, another truth surfaces, softly, gently, like forbidden knowledge that does not want to frighten sleep. Some paths lead nowhere. Some corridors end abruptly, as if the desert itself decided to stop speaking. Some shapes return to themselves, looping back like a thought that cannot resolve, like a prayer that does not demand an answer. This is the quiet power of repetition. It does not always seek reward. Sometimes it seeks alignment. To walk a line again and again is to say, we are still here. We remember. We ask, without forcing the world to reply, beneath the silence that feels almost unbearably tender, because it suggests a devotion that does not bargain, a reverence that does not threaten, only an offering of attention made visible on the earth. And then, as dusk finally turns to night, the imagined procession fades. The shadows retreat. The wind carries away the last hint of chant. The desert returns to stillness, as if nothing ever moved there at all. But the lines remain. Footsteps turn to geometry. Devotion preserved as starlit dust. Marked by the moon, the corridors lie open, quiet and patient, waiting for the next breath, the next season, the next pair of feet that will walk without hurrying. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, not as an answer. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And in the deepening night, the Nazca paths hold their silence, a prayer still rising, softly, into the air. It is said there are rivers that never show their faces. They travel in secret, beneath stone and silence, like memory beneath waking thought. Beneath the silence, the Nazca Desert seems at first to be only what it appears. Dryness, distance, and a vast pale plain written with lines. But tonight, marked by the moon, we step toward a different kind of opening. Not a line stretched across the earth, but a spiral that descends into it. A purkio, a mouth of stone shaped into a gentle vortex, as if the desert has been taught to breathe. The air around it changes. Even before you look down, you feel it. A coolness rising from below. A faint exhale from the earth's throat. Mist thin as a veil, curls upward and disappears into the night. Here, the desert is no longer only a surface. It becomes a body, and beneath its skin, unseen yet essential, water moves like hidden blood. Where memory fades, the spiral offers a new kind of reverence. You gaze down into the purkio, and the steps curve away, worn smooth by time. The stonework holds the faint sheen of dampness, subtle, not dramatic, like a quiet promise kept in the dark. Shadows deepen with every turn of the spiral, and the world above feels suddenly distant, like a dream receding. This is the Nazca's other world. Above, lines, figures, open sky. Below, cool chambers, stone corridors, moisture kept alive. Whispers tell us the Nazca were not only artists of the desert, they were listeners. In a land where rainfall was uncertain, they learned to notice what others might ignore. The way certain places held cooler air, the way the ground spoke through subtle changes, the way plants gathered where water lingered beneath. They watched the landscape as if it were a living text, one written in wind and shadow and the faintest scent of damp stone, and they found where water slept. Pukios, spiraling entrances, led down into subterranean aqueducts. Stone-lined channels guided water through the earth's hidden geometry, protecting it from sun and evaporation. These were not merely constructions, they were lifelines. Quiet engineering that feels almost like ritual, because to shape water's path in such a land is to practice devotion. And as you stand at the rim of the spiral, another thought arrives, soft and steady. What if the lines above are connected to the veins below? What if the Nazca drawings are not only messages to the sky, but mirrors of what cannot be seen? A line on the surface could echo a channel beneath. A corridor drawn in pale earth could be a sign of hidden flow. A figure, spider, bird, spiral, could be more than symbol. It could be gratitude made visible. In ancient worlds, function and ritual often share the same altar. A well can be both tool and temple. A path can be both road and prayer. So perhaps the Nazca did not separate survival from sacredness. Perhaps they drew because water was holy. Because the underworld was not merely darkness, but a realm of keeping. A place where the desert stored its mercy. Deep exploration brings gentle contradiction. Were these lines practical maps? Guides to waterworks? Markers for routes connecting communities to pukios and wells? Or were they sacred symbols? Offerings laid upon the earth to honor forces beyond human control? The answer may be both. Because the people who live by hidden water learn that what is unseen can still be real, and what is real can still be mysterious. Beneath the silence, you begin to feel the Nazca Plateau as a layered scripture. Above, the sky reads in starlight. Below, the earth reads in moisture and stone. And this is where a quieter, more forbidden thought stirs. One that does not ask to be proven, only to be felt. Perhaps the figures are not for the sky at all. Perhaps they are for the underworld. Signals for the spirits of water. Requests made in the only language that lasts. Stone. Spiral. Time. Imagine it. A civilization tracing vast shapes above ground, not to impress any living eye, but to speak downward, to say to the hidden veins, to the unseen currents, we know you are there. We honor your silence. We remember the path you take. In such a reading, the desert is a threshold between two listening realms. The Nazca stand in the middle, offering messages in both directions, upward to the sky that brings rain, and downward to the earth that keeps it. And so, the Pukio becomes more than an entrance. It becomes a sacred throat, breathing coolness into the night. You descend in imagination, step by step, turning with the spiral. The air grows cooler. The sounds of the surface fade. The darkness is not threatening here. It is gentle, like a curtain drawn to protect what is precious. Somewhere below, water waits. It moves slowly, quietly, without spectacle. And in that movement, there's an answer that is not a sentence, only a feeling, a softness in the chest, a calm recognition. Water's silence does not explain itself. It simply continues. At last, you pause at the edge of deeper shadow, where the spiral disappears into the earth's hidden corridor. Above, the stars remain, distant and cold. Below, damp stone holds its quiet sheen. Between them, the Nazca Lines rest on the surface, veins of pale earth, watching over what cannot be seen. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, only trusted. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the spiral continues downward in the mind, breath cooling, darkness gentle, water answering without words. It is said the most patient messages are not placed in boxes. They are placed in landscapes. Beneath the silence, The Nazca Desert holds its vast drawings the way an old library holds books, closed, untouched, waiting. For centuries the lines lay there, not hidden exactly, but unread in their fullness, like a letter sealed without a name. And the opening image is a strange tenderness, an invisible audience. No crowd, no king, no applause. Only time itself, hovering above the plateau like a slow, unseen witness, marked by the moon. The lines are faint from the ground. They are corridors, fragments, pale clearings bordered by stones. You can walk beside them and never know the creature they belong to. You can stand within a wing and not realize it is a wing. The desert gives you pieces and keeps the whole folded away. So the drawings wait. They wait through winds that scrape the surface, but do not erase it. They wait through generations that rise, live, and vanish. They wait through the long turning of seasons that bring little rain. They wait like something that knows its reader will arrive late. Where memory fades, the future begins. And one day, softly, without the crack of drama, the perspective changes. Humans rise briefly like birds, not as conquerors, not as heroes, but as curious beings lifted by a simple miracle distance. The world below becomes quiet and flat, and the mind begins to understand what the feet could never fully see. Then the shock arrives, not loud, but deep. Enormous creatures, sleeping on the ground. A hummingbird stretched across the plain like a prayer. A spider laid out like an oracle. Paths and corridors and spirals. Threads pulled straight through time. The chapter does not treat this as triumph. It feels more like fulfillment. An eerie completion of something begun long ago. As if the Nazca had trusted the sky to deliver their work to someone someday. And when you hold that thought gently, you realize how unusual it is to make something meant to be seen from above, when you live mostly on the ground, to create a message that requires distance, when you cannot easily climb into distance. This is the sacred contradiction at the heart of Nazca. They made what they could not fully see. And to do that is to practice humility. It is a ritual of faith, because faith is not always belief in a God with a name. Sometimes faith is belief in timing, in the idea that meaning can ripen slowly, and that the Maker does not always own the moment of understanding. Whispers tell us ancient people often imagined eyes in the sky, the sun watching as a steady guide, the moon marking nights with pale patience, birds gliding high above, seeing what humans cannot see below, clouds drifting like messengers. And in the Nazca world, it is not difficult to imagine a condor's shadow passing over the plateau, silently recognizing the shapes beneath, or to imagine ancestors, no longer bound to earth, looking down with a kind of quiet acknowledgement. But there is another possibility, one that arrives like forbidden knowledge, softly, without forcing itself. Perhaps the intended viewer was never human at all. Perhaps the sky itself was the audience, not as empty space, but as presence, as something alive enough to be addressed. The Nazca may have offered these figures the way incense is offered, not to receive an answer in words, but to participate in a relationship with the unseen, because sometimes the act of offering is the answer. A hummingbird drawn across earth does not need to work like a tool. It does not need to guarantee rain. It only needs to exist, as proof of attention, patience, reverence. And so the desert becomes a library of vast drawings. Each geoglyph is a page. Each line is a sentence written in absence. Each figure is a chapter that cannot be held in one glance unless you step back far enough, unless you become, for a moment, something like a bird. Now, as you listen, you become one of the late arriving readers, not above the desert in a machine, not with engines and noise, but above it in imagination, held aloft by the gentle distance of story. You turn pages made of earth. And what a delicate act that is, because the ink is not ink. It is pale soil revealed beneath stones. It is fragile in a way that makes it sacred. One careless step could bruise a sentence. One heavy interruption could tear a page. So you read softly. You let the lines speak in their own quiet rhythm. You let the creatures remain half dream, half history. You allow the mystery to keep its veil. Beneath the silence, the plateau does not demand that you solve it. It invites you to witness it, to accept that some meanings are not meant to belong to their makers. Some are meant to belong to time. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Quickly, completely, conclusively. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as the night deepens, the Nazca Lines lie below like sleeping scripture. Vast, patient, unbroken, waiting for eyes not yet born, and for your own eyes, now heavy with sleep, to close gently, so the ancient ink can continue dreaming on the desert page. It is said there are places where the world asks a question and then stays quiet, as if silence itself were part of the answer. Beneath the silence, you stand within such a place. The Nazca Plain stretches out, wide, pale, and patient, and the lines around you do not form a picture from where you stand. They are fragments, a straight corridor that ends without warning, a curve that suggests a wing but never completes its flight, a thin stroke that crosses another like a sentence interrupted. From the ground, the geoglyphs are edges without a hole, like hearing a hymn through a closed door. You recognize the presence of meaning, but the full song remains hidden. Where memory fades, the desert becomes a chapel of partial sight. You imagine a traveler here, no name, no era, only a quiet figure moving slowly among scattered strokes. The traveler walks carefully, as if the ground were sacred parchment. Each step passes over pale earth revealed beneath darker stones. Each line feels deliberate, yet refuses to declare what it is. And so, the traveler learns a gentle truth. Mystery is often born from closeness. When you are too near a thing, it stops being an image and becomes a texture. A curve becomes only a curve. A wing becomes only a long sweep of dust. Distance is what turns fragments into creatures. And without distance, the desert becomes a riddle that will not open. It is said that people have held many lamps up to this plateau, each one hoping to illuminate the same silence in a different way. Some look to the heavens. They see alignments, directions, corridors pointing toward the turning of seasons, toward solstices, rising points, certain stars that return like clockwork to their appointed places. In this lamplight, the Nazca Lines feel like a calendar written on earth, a slow conversation between sky and soil. Others look to water. They see longing etched into the land, lines as ritual pathways leading toward wells, pukios, hidden channels. In this light, the geoglyphs become a language of survival made sacred, offerings of attention to the forces that govern moisture and drought. Others look to community. They imagine gatherings, quiet rites performed on open ground, processions tracing corridors at dusk, bodies moving in repetition until the land itself remembers the choreography. In this lamplight, the plateau becomes a temple without walls, and the lines become the floor plan of devotion. And still others look to performance. They see shapes meant to be walked, danced, repeated. An immense stage where ritual becomes visible through geometry. A hummingbird not only seen, but entered. A spider not only drawn, but circled like a prayer. Each interpretation is a different lamp held to the same stone, and each lamp creates a new shadow. Beneath the silence, contradiction becomes not a problem to eliminate, but feeling to rest inside. Because the Nazca Lines are both simple and impossible. They are simple, stones moved aside, pale earth revealed, measured with rope and stake and steady breath. They are impossible, creatures too large to hold in one gaze from the ground, designs that require distance, messages written as if meant for eyes above. They are visible, open to the sun, laid on the plain. They are hidden, unreadable until you step far enough away, until you are lifted, until you are no longer within the sentence but above it. And perhaps that is why they endure. The desert guards them, yes, dryness preserving what rain would blur. But another guardian is at work, quieter and more profound. Their meaning is not nailed down. A thing with one final explanation can go dead. It becomes a closed door. But a thing that refuses to explain itself stays alive. It keeps returning to the mind, like a question you cannot forget. Here, implied forbidden knowledge stirs softly, without demanding belief. Perhaps the purpose was never a single answer. Perhaps the Nazca Lines were designed as a living riddle, a sacred uncertainty meant to keep the community listening, watching, returning. A plateau that calls people back, season after season, to walk, to offer, to observe the sky, to feel the ground beneath their feet as something more than ground, to come close enough to be confused, and to step back enough to be awed. In such a reading, the geoglyphs are not only messages, they are invitations. They train the mind in humility. They teach that the world contains meanings larger than the self, and that not all meanings arrive as statements. Some arrive as shapes you can only partially see. Some arrive as paths that return to themselves. Some arrive as figures that refuse to land. And so, as night deepens, the traveler's footsteps slow. The wind passes over the lines like a soft breath. Starlight settles on the stones. The desert does not offer a final translation. The map refuses to become a sentence. It remains a poem, and in the quiet of night, you are invited to let the unanswered linger, like a soft veil over waking thought. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. Not completely. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, the fragments around you soften into something gentle. Not an answer, but a calm, ancient mystery that does not need to be solved to be true. It is said that distance changes the heart. Marked by the moon, imagine yourself lifted gently above the Nazca Plateau, not with noise, not with haste, but as if the night itself is taking you by the hand. Twilight deepens into violet. The desert below pales like old bone beneath the first scattered stars. Fog gathers in shallow places, thin as breath, and the lines, those patient carvings of absence, begin to reveal their quiet abundance. Threads, creatures, spirals, corridors, all of it laid out not as a conclusion, but as an echo, because the plateau does not speak in finished sentences. It speaks in gestures that continue. From above, the hummingbird seems to hover again, an immense tenderness stitched into stone and dust. The spider rests like a small oracle. Straight pathways stretch outward and vanish, as if they continue past the edges of sight. And the spirals, those turning mouths of the earth, hint at cool hidden chambers where water keeps its own counsel. Beneath the silence, you feel how each chapter has been a different lamp, held to the same sacred ground. And still, the meaning refuses to settle. This is continuity. The Nazca are gone, as all people eventually become. Their hands no longer lift stones. Their voices no longer gather at dusk. Yet their gestures remain, patient, careful, immense, waiting to be inherited by anyone willing to approach slowly. Generations arrive and depart. Some come with reverence. Some come with curiosity. Some come with instruments and questions and maps, trying to translate what the desert will not translate completely. Even the modern world, so full of bright certainty, cannot make these lines speak in one voice. And perhaps that is not a failure. Perhaps it is the gift. Where memory fades, mystery becomes a kind of shared breath, passed from era to era. Each generation adds a little of its own wondering, and then leaves. The plateau remains, holding the echoes of all these attempts to understand. In the hush of night, you can sense the fragility of the lines, not as a warning, not as scolding, only as reverence. The ink here is not ink. It is pale earth revealed, a sacred page that can be bruised. A single careless step can scar a sentence. A thoughtless movement can interrupt a poem. And yet the desert has preserved the drawings for so long, not by force, but by quietness, by dryness, by the patient agreement between land and time. Deep exploration turns inward now, the way night naturally turns inward. Why are humans drawn to messages that do not speak back? Why do we keep returning to symbols that refuse to become clear? Perhaps because the unanswered keeps the heart awake in a gentle way, not awake with anxiety, awake with wonder. The desert's quiet mirrors something inside us, an empty chamber where all lives. We all carry such a chamber, a place in the mind that cannot be filled with certainty, only softened by mystery. And perhaps the Nazca Lines endure because they touch that chamber. They offer an ancient permission, You do not have to solve everything to be moved by it. You do not have to force meaning into a single shape. You can simply witness. Implied forbidden knowledge drifts through the chapter like mist. Maybe the lines are not a code to crack, but a mirror held up to the sky. A mirror that teaches us to look up, then back down, then finally into ourselves. Because the plateau does not only reflect ancient Nazca life, it reflects the human impulse to seek, to draw, to leave something behind that will outlast a single breath, to write on the earth, as if the earth were listening. Now the stars brighten. The desert grows darker. The lines remain pale, fragile, and endlessly patient. They do not rush you. They do not demand your conclusion. They simply remain. And in that remaining, there is a quiet comfort, as if the world is saying, some things are allowed to stay unfinished. Some things are allowed to be poems. Beneath the silence, starlight settles on the geoglyphs like dust of another world, softly, endlessly, until the plateau becomes a sleeping manuscript again. Perhaps it was never meant to be found. As an answer, some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep comes closer, the desert takes all sound the way it always has. Gently, completely, leaving only the calm afterglow of mystery, and the feeling of starlight resting on stone, as your own thoughts fade into quiet. It is said that even the desert knows how to close a door, not with a sound, but with a settling. Beneath the silence, the last breath of wind crosses the Nazca Plateau. It moves over the pale lines the way a hand moves over a sleeping child's hair, careful, unhurried, not wishing to wait what has been kept. And the opening image is simple and holy, the horizon swallowing the last light. Twilight drains slowly into violet. The stones lose their sharpness. Shadows lengthen and soften. The lines, those patient corridors of absence, begin to fade into the same quiet that birthed them, not because they are gone, because night is returning them to secrecy. This chapter is a slow retreat from the sacred ground, not out of boredom, not out of completion, but out of respect, because there are mysteries you do not solve by holding tighter. You honor them by loosening your grip. Marked by the moon, you look once more across the plateau and feel how the journey has changed your inner pace. At the beginning, the lines were questions, sharp, bright, almost impossible. A thread pulled straight through time. A corridor that refused to explain itself. Then the figures came. The hummingbird suspended in stone and starlight. The spider laid out like an oracle. The spirals breathing coolness from the earth's throat. And slowly, without drama, curiosity became wonder. Wonder became melancholy. Not sadness, but a gentle ache. The feeling of standing near something vast, and realizing it will never fit entirely inside your mind. And now, even that ache begins to soften. Melancholy becomes peace. The Nazca lines begin to feel less like a puzzle, and more like a lullaby written in stone. A lullaby that does not sing in words, but in patience. It is said that some truths arrive only as feeling. You cannot translate them into a single statement. You can only allow them to settle into you, quietly, like dust under starlight. And as you leave the plateau in imagination, the desert seems to offer a final teaching. Not all messages are meant to be decoded. Some are meant to align the mind with stillness. Deep exploration comes now, not as new information, but as a final holding. Two candles in the same chamber, burning without conflict. Perhaps the lines were never for anyone. Perhaps the making was the meaning. The gathering of community. The slow choreography of processions at dusk. The repeated footsteps turning devotion into geometry. The endurance of hands moving stones, not to impress, but to participate in something larger than themselves. In this possibility, the lines are the act itself, a ritual made visible, a way of teaching the land to remember. And perhaps, at the same time, the lines were for a witness beyond our knowing, for sun and moon, passing overhead like silent judges, for birds riding the high air, glancing down and recognizing the shapes, for ancestors imagined as present above the world, for the sky itself, if the sky can be addressed, if starlight can receive offerings. Both possibilities remain. and neither needs to cancel the other. Because in sacred places, contradiction often lives peacefully. It is said the world is full of messages we are not meant to decode, only to honor. This is the implied forbidden knowledge, whispered rather than declared. That meaning is not always ownership. That understanding is not always a prize. That reverence can exist without final translation. Now the night deepens. The plateau becomes quieter, as if the desert is drawing a veil over its own scripture. The lines flatten into near invisibility from the ground. The hummingbird's wings dissolve into darkness. The spider's legs become faint suggestions. The corridors turn into pale memories. Yet nothing is lost. The geoglyphs remain where they have always been, sleeping. The sky remains above them, watching, and the earth remains beneath, holding its hidden veins of water in cool chambers of stone, each watching the other in silence. You feel the invitation in your own body now, to stop reaching for the last answer, to let the unanswered linger like a soft veil over waking thought. Perhaps it was never meant to be found, not as a conclusion. Some voices only echo when we are ready to listen. And as sleep approaches, you carry one final image with you, the hummingbird's unfinished flight, forever hovering, never landing, a small creature made immense, so it could endure. The desert keeps its secrets gently, the stars scatter their quiet light, and the world, at last, becomes a place where nothing needs to be solved, only softened, until your own thoughts drift down, into the long descent of gentle silence.